I'm sure you've seen other animations and sometimes you wonder how the heck was that created. So let's have a look at this simple example of a teacup and there's steam coming out of it. How would you create that effect? You know, maybe you could have a train sort of going off track or something. How would you create that sort of steam effect, that smoke effect, or even clouds? How would you do that? How would you do this? So if you pull an image from online somewhere, there's quite a few different images of a cup and saucer, teacup and saucer, and see if you can create that effect, a steam type of effect. So I will give you, what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do that. So see how you get along with that. So I'm going to pause the video so you guys can get working on that. Okay, so let me show you. Okay, so let me show you how you would do that. So we're going to use this type of a theme. How do you create steam? So I'm just going to create steam on, say, a black canvas or a black stage. So I'll just push this up. So I'm going to create, I don't know, blotches. Let's say they're going to be white. Let's do this again, white. And you could change them around. It doesn't have to be circles. So I'm going to create multiples of these and make sure they're all different. So continuing with that, so I'm going to create a set of blotches, different sizes, and I'll just zoom in so they're not all sort of the same. And I'll just change this one slightly. So I'll just do with this. So I'm going to select all these, convert to a symbol, and it's going to be, I don't know, I'll call it smoke or steam. And now I can introduce my filter, so which I'm going to do a blur. I mean, it's not so great. You can see it's not perfect. So you would generally have to play around with this. So I'm going to rotate that around, and now I will create my tween. I'll just do a classic tween for the sake of it. Insert keyframe. Insert keyframe. And initially, we're going to start off with something small, and when we expand, it'll get bigger. It'll come back up, and in addition to that, we could change the alpha, so it'll sort of die away eventually. So now if we play that, so it gives you that kind of effect of smoke or steam. And you could incorporate that into a nested movie clip. And there's lots of areas you can actually utilize it. Even just having, even if it's not a tween, clouds. How would you create clouds? Rather than just a white sort of blotch, I mean, you can introduce blur effects and transparencies. There is the motion editor. The textbook talks about motion editor in terms of easing out, easing in. You can use that. That does help a great deal. So now moving on to the next part. Here we have a ball. So how would you create that? It's just bouncing up and down. How would you create that? So if you look at it now carefully, what exactly is happening? What is happening? So we have this ball come from the top, bounces. When it bounces, it sort of stretches out. So there's kind of a squish. So when that happens to any object, the volume is always going to remain the same. So you can imagine, if you put some water into a balloon, if you throw it down, it'll just sort of go squish, but the volume will still remain the same. So when you do actually try to manipulate objects, try not to make them smaller or bigger if you're changing the width or the height. So if you stretch it out, the volume will still stay the same, the area of that object. So if we have a look how this is done, so moving on. So if we look at this ball, so this is actually a nested movie. So when we double click on this ball here just goes up and down. That's all that happens. So it gives you the effect when you go back to scene one. All that's happening is this ball just moving across. Now in the movie itself, in the nested clip, we have the ball that goes down. When it comes down, then we have keyframes. Each keyframe, basically, what we're doing, we're just making the ball a bit wider. You can see the volume doesn't change when it squishes, and then it resets back to its normal ball, then it goes back to the top. So moving that across gives you the effect that it's actually bouncing across. As opposed to doing it individually, that would take you much longer to do. So you can do things like that, which can be a huge time saver. And I will make these available in Angel. So now moving on to the next one. And I think we did the blur. So here we've got some text kind of flies in. And it gives you that speed effect. So you could have an object that flies in. So what's happening here is there is no text, but it's all sort of blurred. Then suddenly it appears. So now if we have a look at this, all we have is just a rectangle, comes in, and then suddenly the text appears. So there's no transition between when it's zooming in and it appears. It's as easy as that. And you can apply that to objects, provided they are the same color. So if you have a red object or other multiple colors, you need to have a similar form of color scheme when you're creating the blur effect. Okay, now most of you are generally going to have some kind of background. And we're going to check that. So now let's have a look at these looping backgrounds. So you may have some kind of a character that may be walking here. And we've got... So now let's have a look at these looping backgrounds. So you may have some kind of a character that may be walking here. And we've got these looping backgrounds. They're all running at different speeds. The rear background, the very furthest background with the sky and some skyscrapers, is just static. Then we have the next layer, which is running at a slightly slower speed, and then we have one right at the front, which is much faster. So some of you, if you've ever played games, driving games, you may realize how the clouds tend to move much slower at the far end compared to the mountains tend to move faster. So it's the same type of effect. So when we look at this, the flash file for this animation, okay, so what we have here is generally we have two layers that are moving, or not, they're both moving at the same speed. The only difference is one of them is much longer, so if it's much wider, so if it's wider, it's going to go at a faster rate as to being a smaller one. So I think let me just undo that. Okay, now if we look at the very first layer, it's still tweening. And the same thing with the other one, that's also tweening. So that's what you generally would do. So you would create two layers. One section would stretch further out, the next would be half of that, and then the background. Okay, you could even have three, so you could have, I don't know, you could have maybe a lake at the front, then you could have some mountains, and then you could have some clouds, each of them moving at different speeds. So if we were to remove one of these, the difference is going to be huge. Let's actually delete one of these. Okay, it makes a big difference. Just having one, it just doesn't give you the depth. So having multiple layers of backgrounds will allow you the depth. So I'd like to give you some time to actually see if you may want to implement that into your final project. So how many of you do have backgrounds? So would you have some kind of buildings, beach, ocean, I don't know, something similar to that? Yes? So I'd like to see how far you can get along with creating a background that tends to flow a bit like this. So remember, the very first layer at the top is going to be wider, then it's going to be, generally, rule of thumb is the next layer would be half, and then finally the other one would run around just outside of the stage area. So work with that. Let's see how far you guys get. Okay, so what I've done is I've actually separated, so I've got sort of the clouds, and then there is a slight stutter which I need to clean up, but you could see the clouds are moving in the background too. And the clouds are obviously going to be a shorter width in terms of the buildings at the front. So the further back you go, the shorter the width is going to be.